I was going to start on this challenge materials activity, and I realized that I forgot to talk about a couple things with my text set. So I'd like to come back to this for just a moment. So here was my text set, and I went through the competencies that it addressed, and I forgot to talk about how this helped me as a professional educator. And I had been teaching when I started this class for 5 years in a secondary school setting, predominantly Hispanic, second language learners, poverty-stricken students. And I had never, ever thought about using a graphic novel or a nonfiction picture book with my students, ever. It had never crossed my mind. I had no experience working with picture books. I thought they were for little kids. I thought the graphic novels were for pleasure reading. It wasn't for teaching anything. It wasn't for teaching content. And after this class, after taking this class, after doing this activity, I was really able to see that using quality picture books and quality graphic novels can really help students think critically about a text, specifically students who struggle with reading the longer text. They're still thinking critically, they're still making meaning, they're still creating new knowledge. It's just, a modified text. But the critical thinking that so many ELL students can still do, right? They can think critically in their own language. It's the language that they struggle with, the English language. And these two texts, the graphic novel and the nonfiction picture book, can really help them. And so that really helped me as a teacher to become a better educator. Now, as I look back at this, thinking about what I would change if I were to use this again, this was my first class. It was taken while I was on break from my own teaching. I had never taught high school, and when I created this lesson, I didn't collaborate with any teachers. I think if I were to create a text set again that was for a discipline other than English, other than language arts, I would collaborate with that teacher. This was history. I think I would collaborate with the history teacher to identify specifically the voices that students often struggle to understand, and the strategies that would help students who struggle to understand those voices, or help strategies that specifically would help their students in their content. I didn't do that. I didn't collaborate. And so I kind of created this lesson that had all these different voices. But if the students really struggle to understand that Nazi piece, that Nazi voice, they had little opportunities to kind of get to know that voice and understand it in the smoke and ashes. But the other four didn't really give them a lot of information about that Nazi piece, that Nazi voice. So I think if I were to do this again, I would definitely want to collaborate with the history teacher to understand, to identify what resources he might need or she might need to make this lesson better, to make this lesson more relevant and really help with their curriculum. And I would also collaborate in terms of planning the lesson and teaching the lesson, and take this from here I am teaching a lesson for a class I'm not used to, and turn it into, here's a lesson being taught by the history teacher in collaboration with the library media specialist. So it would be more of a co-plan, co-teach, co-evaluate kind of situation. I think that if I made that change, that would really help this lesson. But I feel like this was a really good jumping point for my first kind of experience back into the classroom. And so now that kind of takes us to this challenged materials project. And the challenged materials project was created for Library Science 5113 in the fall of 2014. So I was about halfway done with my discourse. And this was a really interesting assignment for me. Parents, not all parents are going to have the same kind of viewpoint when it comes to library materials, and I had never really given it much thought. I came from a home where I could read whatever I wanted. My mom just wanted me to read. So if I wanted to read a book that was about death, if I wanted to read a book that was about suicide, if I wanted to read a book that was about sexual assault, if I was reading, if it was helping me in some way, my mom was going to let me do it. She never restricted what I read. But in a world of diversity, it's obvious that not all parents will agree with you and your selection of library materials. And so for this assignment, I needed to locate a book that had frequently been challenged by parents in school libraries across the nation. I needed to read the book and then conduct just a little bit of research, not a lot, on reasons parents typically challenge that book. And this kind of would create a scenario, right? Here's a book. Pretend that you are a librarian. Someone has challenged the book. This is the reason why. What do you do? So once I read the book, kind of developed this scenario in my head, I then needed to locate my district's challenged materials procedure and follow the procedure in the initial kind of informing the principal. That was always kind of the first step, is to inform your administration. And so I was supposed to create a memo or an email or how could I inform my administration about this book? So I selected the book 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. It's a book that's wildly popular among 7th and 8th grade students. It's in my school. I had already read it once, so I was anxious, I was kind of excited to read it again and do a little research about why someone would restrict their children from using this. And so I found that many parents just were not okay with having their children read this book that was about that had these really dark, deep situations happening. There were drugs involved in the book. There was alcohol abuse. There was smoking. There was very sexually explicit. There was some, excuse me, some sexual abuse happening, some kind of teen dating violence, more teen dating violence than parental sexual abuse. But that teen dating violence, that bullying, that drug use, kind of then happened, led a student to commit suicide. And so the book was told from this girl who commits suicide and then kind of tells the world why she committed suicide by recording before she dies. She records, this is my reason why I committed suicide, and you are part of the reason I committed suicide. And these tapes are supposed to be sent to the 13 people, the 13 reasons that she committed suicide. And the story's told from the perspective of Clay, a boy who is, kind of towards the end of the tapes. He listens to him, but he's kind of one of the reasons that she committed suicide. And so there are a lot of parents who are saying, no, my kid can't read this. I don't want my kid to know about sexual assault. I don't want my kid to know about suicide. I don't want my kid to think about suicide. That's just a scary thought. And so I had to write this memo, where in the memo you can see I've included a short synopsis of the book. I've included the reason that it was challenged, my own personal review, okay, what I thought. And then the policy, like what happens? We've had a formal complaint. What happens? Here's our policy from the district. And how can we handle it in the school? And send it to the principal. That was kind of what I was tasked with doing. So I believe that this activity addressed Standard 2, Literacy and Reading, and Competencies 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. So if we start with Standard 2, Standard 2 requires the library media specialist to model and promote reading for enjoyment. One part of promoting reading for enjoyment is allowing the students to select the reading material that interests them. By addressing parent concern and fighting to keep the book on the shelves, I'm able to support learner choice and selection of reading material. One way that you support and promote reading is to keep the books on the shelves and to fight for their right to choose. And by following a district policy to adequately handle this kind of challenge, I'm able to do that. So I think it definitely addresses that kind of component of standard 2. 2.1, a teacher librarian must be familiar with the materials in his or her collection. By reading this book, I became familiar with the names, the themes and format of the material. In completing my research over why it is frequently challenged, I was able to learn about additional reading sources written in a variety of reading formats and reading levels. By reading the material and learning of the book with similar topics, I am able to better promote reading to all students for a variety of reading purposes. If a student comes into the library asking for books similar to 13 Reasons Why, I will have some suggestions. Likewise, if a student comes into the library with questions about suicide or dating violence, I will have a suggestion and be able to support the reader by reading this book, by knowing my content, by knowing my collection, and supporting them by keeping this on the shelf. 2.2, reading promotion. For this project, I selected the book 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. Parents frequently challenge the book because it discusses bullying, sexual assault, and suicide. It is the responsibility of the teacher librarian, that would be me, to promote reading for learning, pleasure, and lifelong learning. As the teacher librarian, I must be aware of the materials in my library and fight for all students' rights to select their own reading material. That's how you promote reading, is to support it. And you have to know the policy to support it. And then you can promote it. And finally, respect for diversity. Parents don't have to agree. You can say, I don't want my kid to read that. But parents don't get to say, I don't want any child to read that, right? That's a bigger issue. And it's my job to support all of those kids. It's my job to protect the needs of all of those students when I develop a collection. And being able to defend this book and say, no, this is why I think kids need to be able to read this book, helps me respect diversity. It helps me respect, I understand you don't want it, but it helps me respect the other students who might need to read this, who might want to read this, and who might benefit from reading this. So I think in that respect, this activity really addresses standard 2.3, respect of diversity. So this activity helped me as an educator because growing up, like I said, I did not have parents who restricted my reading materials. And so I didn't know that parents did this kind of thing, right? I was unaware of how to handle it. And I remember in 2008, my first year of school, as a teacher, I had a parent challenge my use of the novel Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling in my class. I was using one chapter to teach foreshadowing and flashback. I love Harry Potter. I've read it 100 times and wasn't using the whole book. I was using a chapter to teach one thing. And I had a parent complain. And I had no idea what to do or how to handle it. And so I just didn't use it anymore. I didn't use it in my classroom anymore. I picked a different book the next year because I didn't know kind of how to deal with it. And now I do. This project helped me know this is how you do it, right? This is how you show parents. This is why I'm using it, right? This is why it's important. And if you don't want your kid to read it, that's fine, but this is what we need to do. If you really think that no one else should be allowed to use it. But this gave me a way to address those parent concerns, right? So that now I know how to handle that situation and not just get rid of it because I don't want a parent to complain. Now, if I were to create this artifact again, I think I would discuss with my school administrator and my librarian first. At the start of the project, I took on the role of the teacher librarian, and I conducted the research to identify parent voice in regards to the challenge materials. I located the school's policy and followed the guidelines to create the initial response. But I didn't talk to my administrator, and I didn't talk to my school librarian. By speaking with the administrator and school librarian, I could have gained additional insight and experience into handling these materials, these challenged materials. So I think if I were to do it again, I would talk to them and kind of get their experience, their opinion about how to handle this and how often it happens. And I just feel like I could have gained some additional insight by talking to them first about this project and kind of how they handle it within a school when a parent first complains, if they don't make it formal, if it's just kind of a complaint in the school. So I would talk to them and get their knowledge about this process as well, rather than just going straight for the district and just following the district policy. I think it could have been helpful. And so that is the end of Standard 2 AASL Standard 2